Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. In my last video, I was discussing the violence following before and after Tanzania's recent elections. And I was talking about what lessons should the people of Tanzania learn from it, and what lesson can we, Zimbabweans, learn from it? And one of the responses I got was that voting in many African countries is a waste of time. Indeed, some have even gone to the extent of saying democracy does not work in Africa. I think that is drawing the wrong conclusion on the basis of the misinterpretation of the events on the ground. In Zimbabwe, we have failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. And many people would agree that the elections in Tanzania were a mockery of democracy. So for anyone to then conclude that democracy does not work when we have never tried it, it's meaningless. We have never had free, fair, and credible elections, truly democratic elections. Then how can we turn around and say democracy does not work? We in Zimbabwe started on the right footing. When we were fighting for our independence, one of the rallying calls was one man, one vote. Fortunately, those who were spearheading the nation's liberation struggle shortchanged the people. Before we even got to holding the first elections in 1980, Zanu PF had changed the system. Instead of seeking one man, one vote, Zanu PF realized that it was risking losing power. And so to consolidate its own hold on power, the regime decided and campaigned for the 1980 elections on the basis that if the party does not win those elections, the Bush war would continue. Of course, the people voted to end the Bush war. But you can't pretend that was a democratic election either. Indeed, by voting to end the Bush war, the people voted to give up their right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. That is the problem. Ever since 1980, those 1980 elections, soon after, in fact, 3 years after that, the Zanu PF launched the Kuvhota massacre, which was purely to consolidate its stranglehold on power. It forced the only other party that posed a serious challenge to Zanu PF's rule PF ZAPU to give up and join Zanu PF to form Zanu PF. And Dr. Ngomo and company did by signing the Unit Accords in 1987. And that paved the way for Mugabe to impose the de facto one-party state that has ruled Zimbabwe to this day. The problem is not voting per se. Our problem in Zimbabwe is voting in an election that is so flawed, so illegal. The only logical thing to do is to withdraw. That is at the heart of the argument. The question then is, why have we been participating in these flawed elections? This is a quotation from David Coulthard, spoke, making that argument that the election process in Zimbabwe is so flawed, so illegal, the only logical thing to do is to withdraw. Why have we failed to withdraw? Well, he explains it there. Read. Opposition leaders have been participating in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that participating will only give Zanu PF legitimacy. But they've insisted in participating out of greed. And the people themselves have been foolish to be easily conned into believing that the opposition can win rigged elections. The opposition have been telling them that to disguise the fact that they're participating into these elections out of greed. In 2017 was an interesting milestone in Zimbabwe's political history. The military coup. The military coup offered the option to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. Or so the people believed. All he did was to remove one dictator for another. So the most important lesson, actually, that the people should have learned in 2017 is that we do not end our problems of the dictatorship by removing one dictator and replacing him with another. That should have been the number one lesson that the people of Zimbabwe learned. So at the present moment, the argument is, should people continue to participate in these flawed elections in Zimbabwe? The answer is no. We know the elections are flawed. We know Zanu PF is rigging these elections. We know that if we participate, we only give Zanu PF legitimacy. We also know that the opposition are participating and conning the people to participate out of greed. After 45 years of rigged elections, we should have learned the lessons by now, that lesson by now. But unfortunately, we're slow learners. I believe Chamisa and Company are conning people to participate in 2028 elections. And this time, they've come up with a new lie. Instead of I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, hashtag God is in it, they're coming up with a new lie. They're telling the people of Zimbabwe, if you participate in these flawed elections in 2028, you will stop Mnangagwa getting into power. You stop the ED 2030 agenda. You stop Mnangagwa corrupting the nation's constitution. This is a fallacious argument. If we participate in 2028, let's be very clear on that. If we participate, we will give Zanu-PF legitimacy. Yes. We may even stop Mnangagwa extending his stay in power. But what matters the most here is that Mnangagwa or Zanu-PF will rig those elections and get legitimacy. In other words, the best result we can expect here, if we participate, is stopping Zanu-PF or Mnangagwa extending his stay in power beyond 2028. But we will be stuck with the Zanu-PF dictatorship because Zanu-PF will rig 2028 and get legitimacy because we participated in our numbers. We should have learned the lesson from 2017. 2017 offered us a chance to replace Mugabe. Mugabe must go was the number one issue. And people grabbed it. What they failed to realize is 2017 was swapping one dictator with another. And that's all we managed to accomplish. At the end of the day, we ended up with a dictatorship. Participating in 2028 with no reforms, yes, it may well stop Mnangagwa, but it will not stop the Zanu-PF dictatorship. We will have the Zanu-PF dictatorship and another Zanu-PF dictator, a new one. This has happened in 2017. In other words, all we are doing here is repeating what we did in 2017. We are trying to end the Zanu-PF dictatorship by removing one dictator at a time. This is the equivalent of cutting off one head of the snakes on Medusa said, one at a time. To those who are not familiar with the story, this is from Greek mythology, where this unfortunate young lady, her hair was turned into snakes. We have not learned a thing. What we need is to end the dictatorship itself, and not to be removing one dictator at a time. Because, yes, even if we were to cut off one head, as we did in 2017, as we know, another dictator emerged. Because the dictatorship is still alive. The best we can do if we participate in 2028 without any reforms is that ZANU-PF will rig those elections and have legitimacy. The dictatorship will survive. And removing Mnangagwa will only mean that another dictator will take his place. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is that we should sever the head of Medusa. This is what the Greek hero Perseus did. We should concentrate on severing or ending the dictatorship. Don't worry about the individual heads, the individual snakes, the individual dictator. They cannot survive once the head of Medusa is severed. Dictators need the dictatorship like a fish needs water. Remove the water, the fish will die. Remove the dictatorship, the dictator, all of them, they will die. How do we end the dictatorship? That choice has been there all along. Implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. That's not rocket science. Why are we participating in elections without a verified voters roll, for instance? That's common sense. If we do not participate, ZANU-PF will lose legitimacy. Some people will say, that doesn't happen. Well, it happened. This is exactly what happened in 2008. ZANU-PF was forced into the GNU in 2008 because both SADC and the AU dismissed the process, the election process in 2008 as flawed and illegitimate. SADC and the AU made the same pronouncement at the end of 2023 elections, but they could not go the extra mile and deny ZANU-PF legitimacy because 2 million Zimbabweans had participated in those flawed elections, voting for Chamisa. Cannot keep on repeating the same mistake. If you participate, you give the process legitimacy. ED 2030 is only focusing on Mnangagwa. Just one head, one snake on Medusa's head. Focus on implementing reforms or do not participate will sever the dictatorship. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.